You know the feeling. You wake up and for a few seconds there's just silence. And then the list arrives. Not the to-do list of errands, the other list. The list of people you thought you might be by now. There's the version of you who wakes up at 5 and writes 3 pages before the sun comes up. There's the version of you who builds things with their hands, who lives in a small, quiet town and doesn't check their phone for 3 days. There's the version who goes back to school, learns a completely new language, and becomes unrecognizable to everyone who ever underestimated them. And then there's the version who just wants to be soft, who wants to stop optimizing, stop growing, stop becoming, and just exist without the pressure to turn existence into a narrative arc. All of these versions feel true, but they can't all be true at the same time. And so you find yourself standing in the doorway of your own life, 1 foot in and 1 foot out, unable to fully move toward any of them because choosing one feels like murdering the others. You can't commit to the disciplined morning routine because the spontaneous, messy, creative version of you might need that sleep to dream something weird and useful. You can't commit to the quiet, slow life because the ambitious, sharp-edged version of you is still hungry and pacing somewhere in the back of your mind. And the strangest part isn't the indecision. The strangest part is the grief. There is a low, humming grief that follows you through the day. It's the grief of all the selves you will never get to fully inhabit. It's the quiet realization that time is a narrowing corridor, and with every door you open, 3 more lock behind you without a sound. Most advice about this is loud and confident. Pick one, stick with it, commit or die wondering. But you have tried that. You've tried to brute force your way into a single identity, to staple down the loose corners of your curiosity, and it works for about 3 days. Then the ghost of the other you shows up. You're at a party and you suddenly feel like you're wearing a costume that doesn't fit. You're in a meeting speaking in the voice of a person you decided to be on Monday, and it sounds like a lie scraping against your teeth. You start to wonder if there's something structurally wrong with you. Maybe a lack of discipline, maybe a fear of success, maybe a profound, incurable flakiness that runs down to the bone. You look at people who have a clear brand, a clear path, a clear answer to the question, what do you do? And you feel a mixture of envy and confusion. How do they do it? How do they close all those other windows and just breathe the air of one room?
Here is where the reframe happens. Not as a motivational quote, as a neurological truth. You are not broken. You are not flaky. You are not suffering from a failure of will. What you are experiencing is a highly adaptive, deeply intelligent response from a brain that evolved to keep you safe in a world that no longer exists. The inability to commit to one version of yourself isn't a sign that you are lost. It is evidence that your brain is doing exactly what it was designed to do. Predict threats, manage social complexity, and keep your options open in an environment of uncertainty. For most of human history, committing to one fixed identity was dangerous. If you were only the warrior, you starved when there was no war. If you were only the healer, you were useless when the tribe needed to move camp. Rigid specialization was a luxury of very recent, very stable societies. Your ancestors survived because they could shapeshift, because they could read the room and become who the moment required them to be. We carry that wiring inside us still, but modern life has given it a strange, cruel twist. We are no longer adapting to the seasons or the threat of predators. We are adapting to an infinite scroll of possibility. There's a specific mechanism in the brain that drives this particular kind of paralysis. It lives at the intersection of the default mode network and the dopamine system. The default mode network is the part of your brain that activates when you're not focused on a task. It's the daydreaming engine. It's where you construct narratives about who you are, who you were, and who you might become. When you imagine a future self, let's say the novelist, your brain doesn't treat it as a hypothetical. It treats it as a simulation. It fires a small, sweet burst of dopamine. This dopamine is not a reward for doing the work. It's a reward for imagining the outcome. Your brain, in its beautiful, lazy efficiency, has learned that thinking about the change feels almost as good as making the change. And here is where the trap tightens. Because you have multiple compelling simulations, the artist, the entrepreneur, the monk, the traveler, your default mode network becomes a crowded room. Every time you try to commit to the quiet, disciplined life, the brain shows you a vivid, dopamine-drenched preview of the adventurous, spontaneous life you're giving up. You feel the loss before it even happens. This is called anticipatory regret, and your brain hates regret more than it almost hates anything else. It will keep you floating in a state of potential, because potential is a place where no future self has died yet. Potential is a painless, endless waiting room.
Think of it like this. Your mind is a radio tuned to too many stations at once. You're getting the static of the news station, the bass of the music station, and the whisper of the talk show all layered on top of each other. You can't dance to any of it. You can't understand any of it. So you just sit there, hand on the dial, frozen, listening to the noise of everything you could be. Or think of it as a set of parallel train tracks. You're standing on a platform, but you have one foot on a train heading to the mountains and one foot on a train heading to the sea. As long as the trains haven't left, you feel the possibility of both destinations. The moment you step fully onto one train, you hear the whistle of the other departing. That sound is what keeps you on the platform. It's easier to stand in the station and feel the potential of the journey than to be on the train, looking out the window, wondering what the other view would have been. So how do you move? How do you work with this machinery instead of letting it stall you indefinitely? There is a way through. It doesn't require you to kill the other versions of yourself. It requires you to change the way you relate to time and identity. The solution is not narrowing who you are. The solution is expanding how long you get to be it. The first step is something called temporal bracketing. Now here is what you can do. You do not commit to a version of yourself for a lifetime. You commit to a version of yourself for a season. You set a clear, defined window. 3 months, 6 months, 1 summer. You say to yourself, for this specific block of time, I am the person who writes in the morning. And here is why this works in the brain. This directly quiets the alarm bells of the default mode network. When you say forever, the brain sees a permanent loss of all other possibilities. It panics. It floods you with resistance. But when you say 6 weeks, the brain relaxes. It knows the other selves are not being executed. They are simply being placed on a shelf, still breathing, waiting for their turn. Let's see how this plays out in an ordinary life. Imagine you want to be someone who plays guitar. Don't tell yourself, I'm a musician now. Tell yourself, until the leaves turn color, my only creative outlet is these 6 strings. After that, you can be the person who only builds furniture or only studies history. The brain can endure a temporary narrowing of identity. It cannot endure a permanent one.
The second step is environment sculpting, and what this means is you must change the visual and spatial cues around you to support the current season's identity. You cannot rely on willpower alone. Willpower is a fragile, exhaustible resource in the prefrontal cortex, and here is why this works inside your head. The basal ganglia, the part of the brain responsible for habit and automatic behavior, is triggered entirely by context. If your environment looks like the messy, chaotic, multi-potential space you usually inhabit, your brain will default to the usual behavior: scanning, switching, and daydreaming. You have to give the brain a clear signal that says, in this space, we are one thing. To see how this shows up in real life, consider this scenario. If you are in a season of being the writer, you don't just open a laptop. You clear the desk. You put the guitar case in the closet. You move the stack of business books off the nightstand and replace it with a single novel. It feels almost ridiculous, like you're setting the stage for a play, and that is exactly what you are doing. You are giving the visual cortex a clean, unambiguous instruction. The brain sees the cleared desk and thinks, this is the only door open right now. Okay. The third step is identity scaffolding. What this asks of you is to anchor this temporary version of you to a single, non-negotiable daily action. Not a big goal, a tiny ritual. And the reason this works is rooted in how the brain builds a sense of self. The brain does not believe in abstract identities. It believes in evidence. The neuroscientist Antonio Damasio talks about the proto-self, a very basic moment-to-moment sense of being that is built entirely from body states and actions. If you want the brain to believe you are the kind of person who exercises, you cannot tell it. You must show it evidence by moving the body. The moment you complete the tiny action, the brain updates the model of who you are. It thinks, well, I just did the thing, I must be the person who does the thing. And a real-life example of this looks surprisingly small. You are in a season of being the calm, grounded version of yourself. The scaffolding is not a 45-minute meditation session. It's pouring hot water over tea leaves in a specific mug every single morning, standing still until the steam stops rising. That's it. That is the ritual that tells the brain we are the version of us that pauses.
The fourth step is ritualized grief. This might sound heavy, but it's the most liberating piece of the framework. Now here is what you can do with it. When you feel the pang of regret for the self you are not currently being, you acknowledge it. You don't push it away. You don't tell yourself, stop being silly, you can do that later. You let it have a moment. And here is why this works in the brain. Suppressed emotion activates the amygdala and increases stress hormones. Acknowledged emotion, especially when named, reduces activity in the amygdala and increases activity in the prefrontal cortex. This is the neurological difference between drowning in feeling and observing feeling. By naming the loss, you complete the stress cycle. You tell the brain, I hear the whistle of the other train. It is sad, and we are still staying on this train for now. To see this in action, imagine this ordinary moment. You see a photo of someone living a nomadic, wild life, and you feel the stab of that should be me. Instead of scrolling past it in panic, you pause. You say internally, or even out loud if you're alone, I am grieving that part of me right now. That's a beautiful part. It's not gone. It's just waiting. And I'm doing this other thing right now. The grief passes faster when you hold it than when you run from it. There is one mental model that holds all of this together. It is the model of the garden, not the factory. A factory is designed to produce one thing forever. It is efficient, loud, and if it stops making that one thing, it is considered a failure or a ruin. We have been taught to think of ourselves as factories. Find your niche, scale production, optimize output. But a human mind is not a factory. A human mind is a garden. In a garden, there are seasons. There is a time for the tomatoes to grow heavy and red, and then that season ends. The plant is pulled up and the soil rests. Then there is a time for the kale to harden in the frost. Then there is a time for the soil to look empty and bare, which is not a sign of failure, but a sign of deep underground work. If you are a garden, you do not commit to one plant for all of eternity. That would kill the soil. That would be a monoculture disaster. You commit to the rotation. You commit to the cycle of growth and rest, of rooting and blooming, of letting some plots lie fallow while others burst with color. You cannot be all of yourselves at once. That is true. But you can be all of them across the arc of a long life. And the real commitment, the one that quiets the noise and allows you to finally step off the platform and onto the train, is not a commitment to a single identity. It is a commitment to the process of becoming. It is a commitment to the patience required to let the garden change. The train you are on right now is the right train because you are on it. And the other train, the one with the view you didn't see, it's on a parallel track. It curves through the same landscape. And if you watch closely, in a few months, your track might bend toward that view anyway. The landscape is bigger than you think. You aren't losing anything. You are just choosing what to look at first. You can take a breath now. You don't have to decide who you are for the rest of your life today. You just have to decide who you are for this season. And that is more than enough. That is how the mind finally quiets down. Not by silencing the other voices, but by telling them, softly and with love, not yet, but soon, I promise, you'll have your turn.